This is a pyramid, and this is how the world works. This is actually how the traditional financial market works. Everybody's stepping on everybody to get to the top. And everybody at the very bottom think they can get to the top just if they work hard enough. What I want to do is create a vortex.
The global launch of HyperVerse is happening right now.
This honestly is real.
This is Mom, you're being conned.
I do strongly urge everyone to join us.
Are you ready to witness the rise of a new golden age?
When am I going to get my money?
So I was chatting to a mate who mentioned that her hairdresser had put some money into this scheme called HyperVerse. She'd put in about $40,000 for herself, and she'd also put in $20,000 that she'd set aside for her son's housing deposit. During lockdown, she'd had to close her business, so she was financially a bit insecure, and this was presented to her as a way of making a good passive income. She was worried that the money had gone, and so I started to look into it. And I guess the question for me at that point was, well, she can't be the only person who's put money into this HyperVerse thing, whatever HyperVerse is.
The metaverse is here. Beware, it matters. The global launch of HyperVerse is happening right now.
We will create a parallel system of existence that will change how people live.
You can be a galaxy wanderer or a galaxy entrepreneur.
Like many of you, I've had my fair share of disappointments in the cryptocurrency space. I knew that there had to be a company out there that would be the answer for us all.
I believe that some people must be wondering like, hey, virtual, I don't like it. No matter you like it or not, you have to accept it. This is reality. The opportunity is knocking your door. You may select to ignore it or welcome it and receive more happiness in your life. Life is short.
From that point, I really went down the rabbit hole. I found a bunch of Facebook groups with people who'd invested in HyperVerse, people talking about what had happened to their money, people concerned that their money was lost. I found groups of people who were still hopeful that they were going to get their money back. I found a lot of promotional material and hype PR about HyperVerse.
Guys, reach out to your closest ones, reach out to, anyone at all and get this going for them, because you know what? This will be the best thing that has happened to them, like it has with us.
Some of the senior promoters in the US and the UK who were quite ostentatious in their wealth.
So while I'm out there, Bitcoin Rodney is brand new. The same way right now you see this is Balenciaga, right here, the big B on there, but also Bitcoin Rodney. You would have never known that. You would have thought it was a collaboration. Smart, huh? Wink, wink.
Initially, I was very much focused on just what had happened in Australia. And I think in one morning I spoke to maybe half a dozen investors, and I quickly tallied up that among those there'd been a total loss of about $500,000. I spoke to one guy in Tasmania who lost $100,000. He was also a recruiter. He'd brought in about 18 different people into HyperVerse, and he says he's lost about 16 of those friends or acquaintances, won't talk to him anymore. I spoke to one guy in the UK who'd put in close to £1 million that he'd put in after selling his house, and they decided to put the money in while they were looking for a new house. And in the period that the money was in, it disappeared. So they lost their house. I realised at that point that this was huge, that this had spread all over the world, and that the amount of money lost was pretty astronomical.
Sort of like fiddle with this.
I did have a friend of 30 years, and she contacted me through Facebook Messenger. Anyway, she told me about this fantastic opportunity of making passive income with little money, and it keeps growing. And I said, really? And she said to me, it's something to do with cryptocurrency. You know about crypto? And I said, sort of. I'm not really that keen on it because I don't know much about it. She showed me her returns from her 500 6 months ago to when 6 months later, she was already on over 5,000K. And it was so believable. And I thought, oh, well, she's a good friend. She's not going to lead me astray.
I first heard about HyperVerse from a business acquaintance who, during the COVID lockdowns in Melbourne, He said that his business would not have survived without his involvement in HyperVerse. I asked him to explain the premise of it, and he said to me, Vera, look at your mobile phone. With your mobile phone, you can email, you can speak to someone in another country, you can do so many things with this small device. How does it work? How does it all work in this small device that you can put in your pocket? And I said, I don't know. He said, exactly. He didn't know either, he said, but it works. I know it works. So that was the explanation he gave me as to how it works.
And within a week, she managed to get me to put in equivalent of 500 US. Within the 6 months that I had my account on HyperVerse, I withdrew 150, it went smoothly. And then I was coached and said, come on, put some more money in, open another account. And I decided, okay, why not? And I opened another account in my name and 2 accounts for my grandkids. So the total I put in all together, after it's converted from Australian dollars to USDT, anyway, it's about $5,000.
I invested approximately 55,000 in HyperVerse. I sort of went all in, and he didn't tell me to invest a whole lot, but he presented the opportunity so handsomely, with such a handsome return. Initially, I was able to withdraw quite handsome rewards, just as they extolled. You went through their platform, and eventually it wound up as dollars in your bank account.
Here's how HyperVerse worked. You had to buy a membership. The membership cost a minimum of $300 US. You were guaranteed a minimum of 0.5% per day with a 300% return over 600 days. So you tripled your money. You'd get paid in hyper units, and if you reinvested those hyper units, your rewards would accelerate. You were also incentivized to bring in new members in classic pyramid, multi-level marketing manner. So basically, not just the level below you that you recruited would you financially benefit from, but if those people then recruited others and so on down 20 levels, you would benefit from those new recruits. The more people you brought in, the more money you brought in, the higher you would rise within the hyper community. The highest rank you could achieve was a VIP 5-star. I guess the big question is where the money was coming from. Investors were told that it was coming from Bitcoin mining, that they were part of this blockchain alliance, which was able to generate these incredible profits for them. We know now that the money was all coming from new entrants into the scheme. One of the natural places to start was to try and get in contact with the Chief Executive Officer to see where he'd gone following HyperVerse, to try and make contact with him, to have a conversation with him.
Our HyperVerse ecosystem is focused a lot on our own metaverse, and that includes a variety of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are a fancy name for a unique piece of digital property on the blockchain.
All the HyperVerse material presented Stephen Rees-Lewis as this very highly credentialed fintech whiz.
Working with Goldman Sachs, setting up his own web development company that he ended up selling to Adobe.
He was qualified at Leeds University and Cambridge University. I tried contacting the various institutions that were on his CV. It took quite a lot of work to, I guess, one by one tick them off as being bogus. And then that led me to the conclusion that this guy, either he wasn't real or they had just fabricated his CV. It was one or the other. And then it was a matter of trying to track him down.
I was just paid to do a role. I was no more than that. I was basically just someone who was drafted in to say a few words and then leave and paid for that. I work in Thailand as a teacher and teaching business English and English as a second language, and do some television presenting punditry work. And I was approached about some television presenting business opportunity with an agent, and they're involved in working with HyperVerse. All I ever received from this gig, this job, was the payment per month, which was about 20,000 baht for 9 months. And they bought me a suit, a pair of shoes, a couple of shirts, a tie. And that's the only payment I ever received from anyone. I certainly didn't receive any additional money from what they did to everyone else out there. No way did I receive anything else from anyone else. This metaverse race has just started, so I do strongly urge everyone to join us as an early backer and supporter of this foray into the metaverse era. There wasn't anything that I would say that really made me feel off about it, because they never indicated money or percentages that you could earn from it. The fake qualifications were probably one of the most shocking things, actually, because I never knew the whole time I was working with them that they'd done that. You know, they told me a few things where I would be in the public eye, and they told me I'd be a CEO of a company and my name would be Stephen Rees-Lewis, etc. But they never told me that they would sell me as this person who had dealings with Goldman Sachs. I know there were people out there that watched me and felt I was believable enough to put their money into a loan, maybe without even doing any research, and that's enough for me. I feel, incredibly sad, sorry, really, for these people. All of these people that got caught out. I wish I knew before I got involved, because this certainly wasn't worth the money or anything to get involved in something like this at all.
Stephen Rees-Lewis was a dead end. In trying to establish who was behind HyperVerse, it was sort of necessary to disentangle all the various parts and companies and iterations of the hyper schemes. Before HyperVerse, there was HyperFund. Before HyperFund, there was HyperCapital. And behind all three of these was allegedly the Hypertech group. Across all these different groups, there were two people whose names stood out consistently, and that was Sam Lee and Ryan Zhu. Sam Lee was the chairman of Hypertech Group, and Ryan Zhu was listed as the founder.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me. I am the CEO and founder of Blockchain Global and chairman of the Hypertech Group.
Separately, Lee and Zhu also set up Blockchain Global, which collapsed in 2021, owing creditors $58 million. Sam Lee is an Australian citizen. He was feted as the crown prince of Bitcoin. He was a blockchain entrepreneur in Melbourne. Sam Lee relocated to Dubai in late 2021 when Blockchain Global collapsed. Ryan Zhu is not an Australian citizen. He's a Chinese citizen, but no one knows where Ryan Zhu is. Hypertech Group launched HyperFund in 2019. Prior to that, there was a similar program called HyperCapital, which seems to have been the first of the hyper group of crypto schemes. But they launched HyperFund, and HyperFund later became HyperVerse. So soon after the 2021 launch, there was a flurry of promotion. There were messages of support recorded by people like Steve Wozniak and Chuck Norris, although it's not clear at all that they have any idea of what they're actually promoting, and those celebrities are available to hire through Cameo.
Under the leadership of CEO Stephen, HyperVerse will be the leader of metaverse space.
Go on intergalactic explorations, collecting exclusive in-world NFTs. Can't wait for the HyperVerse.
There was a real buzz about it in those early months of 2022, but then very soon people started reporting withdrawal problems. The company at that point were saying, bear with us, technical problems, and there were people who were starting to get worried that their money was gone. And then there were people who had recruited others, and those recruits were coming to them saying, I can't get my money out, where's my money?
My question is, when am I going to get my money? Because I've not withdrawn any of them. Like, I have made members to the people who are my neighbors, and they every now and again keep coming and asking me, when am I going to get my money?
I have in my team a lot of people asking me the same question: when are we going to get paid? When are we going to get paid?
Sharice, she's saying that, and then she put in $20,000. When can she get her money back? She's a single mom, also a stroke survivor. Was critical in hospital and ICU, and would love to get back her funds.
I was very, very hesitant to tell them. And then, of course, when I told my son and my daughter, my son in Queensland and my daughter in Canberra, I says, Mom, you're being conned. That's a scam. You're going to lose your money. You're never going to get it back. And they keep saying to me, Mom, withdraw your money. But I said, I can't withdraw. I said, what do you mean you can't? Because when I did try to withdraw, like a big amount, say for example, I put in $1,000, it wouldn't let me. November 2022, I did try to withdraw $1,000 from one of my accounts because that was already over 10K and the other one's 15K. So I said, I'm only withdrawing 1,000. I just want to use it for my holidays, but I couldn't withdraw. Then my friend kept saying to me, don't worry about it, just let it keep growing and growing. And then eventually you can withdraw big amounts like 5K or something like that when you're ready to go on holidays. I didn't realize that HyperVerse or HyperFund at the beginning is a multi-level marketing where, because he introduced me to it, she was actually getting the kickback from my money that was growing. And I realized too that she persuaded me not to withdraw money so that she gets more kickback into her pocket.
I first experienced problems with withdrawals in 2022, around February, March. I'd put in for a withdrawal and it was still pending. So after a couple of days, I rang my up person and I said, there's a bit of a problem this time, what am I doing wrong? And he explained it that there was a backlog with increased membership. More people were, withdrawing, going through the process, therefore it was a backlog, and it would just take a bit of time. So be patient. So I repeated the process to the point of I had about 20 withdrawals pending, and they didn't move past that pending point.
So after the problems with withdrawals started to plague HyperVerse, people were told that the way to guarantee their investment was to migrate it across to a new scheme, which was called HyperNation. Now, I've spoken to some investors who, once they watched the HyperNation launch, they were like, nah, I'm out, because the HyperNation launch was next level. It had a guy in a gold mask talking about universal basic income. It had a woman in a black veil talking about the trading of NFTs.
But it didn't include Sam Lee or Ryan Zhu.
Let us work together to create a systematic utopia that the world has never seen before. The world is changing, and centralization will soon be a thing of the past. Are you ready to witness the rise of a new golden age?
The Hyper NFT platform is about to launch its first NFT collection called Hitchhiker of Star.
Ladies and gentlemen, right now, the opportunity of a lifetime is knocking on your door. You have a choice to either ignore it or welcome it. As a way to improve your life, I would like to say, life is short.
At that point, I still believe in the company. I still believe that my money was safe, that I can get some money off it. And then I started to doubt it when sometime this year, I think maybe February, it got changed again, and I have to change it into Diversionary. And actually, there's so many steps that I have to do to keep changing and changing.
HyperNation disappeared very quickly. I asked this particular person what's happened. He said, look, that would come up. They were setting up another platform, which was VAV, and we're all Satoshi, which I wasn't convinced of. And I've got to say, the only thing that saved me from investing any further was they asked for your identification. And you had to produce your driver's licence as ID, and mine had expired. And that was a godsend, because I couldn't be registered as a We're All Satoshi customer and didn't get sucked in further.
So Sam Lee starts to front up to Zoom meetings full of angry investors demanding to get their money back. And he basically says, look, I acknowledge that there's a problem, that things went wrong. He claims that he always thought there was enough money to go round. He acknowledges that he was one of the founding members of the Hypertech group, but claims he lost visibility over HyperVerse and was involved in HyperFund, but not HyperVerse. He claims that he can't talk about what happened or who's responsible because he signed NDAs, And there's this mystery corporate team who apparently are responsible, but we don't know who they are.
Who is corporate? Well, I've made it clear that I'm still under NDA, so I can't say. But it's whoever picks up the database and moves it into a new platform. The responsibility of distributing the rewards to members solely lies with corporate.
I want you to explain to me your role with corporate, because you have indicated that you are part of the founding of HyperVerse. You are part of corporate. Is there
incorrect? Absolutely incorrect. Absolutely incorrect. I have never been a part of HyperVerse. I have supplied technology to corporate, and I have generated returns on the funds that corporate has deployed. I have tried all throughout 2022. I've tried for almost an entire year to get that visibility from corporate. But this is a problem that corporate created, and they don't want me as part of a solution. Money was given to me, and that was into the funds. The funds have generated great returns, and then we have then taken the funds back to corporate for distribution to the community. I'm on the other side here.
Our community leaders have always projected you as the man with the Midas touch. Hypertech, HyperVerse, HyperFund, whatever, it's Samly, and it's Samly. That is all we have been told day in, day out.
People were concerned that there hadn't been any warning against investing into this. And there was also this common thread where most people had done a bit of due diligence, right? Like most people had done some preliminary Google searches and had looked into the companies behind HyperVerse. They'd seen that they were Australian registered companies. They were able to Google the names and get some results, which gave them enough satisfaction that this was legit.
When I was shown the video of Sam Lee and the fact that he was a Chinese Australian from Melbourne, and so I said, oh, that's credible.
So in a lot of the effort to convince investors that this was a legitimate opportunity, the Australian credentials of those companies were promoted, including things like their listing on the ASIC registry. That was used to convince people that this was a safe bet.
Yes, and we believe as an ASX-listed company, which is what we're gunning towards, will bring legitimacy, transparency and accountability to the Bitcoin industry as a whole.
HyperVerse presented information to assure people that they weren't selling an investment product, that they were selling a rewards-based membership model. And they did that to give people the impression that they didn't have to comply with securities law. In some ways, that gave people a false sense of assurance that what they were investing into was allowed, that it was legal, because otherwise it would be clearly in breach of securities law.
Under no circumstances should this presentation be considered as any type of solicitation, investment, legal, or financial advice. There is no recommendation in this presentation to acquire any membership, product, or service.
We do not purport HyperVerse membership to be a get-rich-quick scheme. There is no recommendation in this presentation to acquire any membership, product, or service.
The compliance officer for HyperVerse was actually a woman in the US who'd previously been convicted of Ponzi frauds. There were warnings in early 2021 about Hyperfund in the UK. There were warnings in New Zealand, Germany, Hungary, Canada. Australia's corporate regulator, ASIC, when we asked them about the failure to put out a warning, they said they put out a general warning about crypto investment schemes, but don't necessarily name them. They did finally put out a warning in February 2024, long after it had all closed down. And one of the things that has really struck me about this is there's these kind of cult-like overtones to the way that Sam Lee has conducted these various Zoom meetings, particularly since it all fell apart.
I'm going to tear up. I'm tearing up now, Sarah, because I don't feel like you have to take all this responsibility. Okay, it's not all you.
I think because this flourished during the pandemic, when people were isolated, when people were feeling financially precarious, this hyper community became a real touchstone for people who were stuck at home behind their computers. And I think that's sort of part of the reason that this took off in the way that it did. So who's been held to account? In early 2024, there were the first arrests. 2 senior US promoters, Rodney Burton, known as Bitcoin Rodney, and Brenda Chunga, known as Bitcoin Beauty, were arrested for their role as HyperVerse promoters. They were both very senior promoters in the US. Brenda Chunga was credited with being the face of HyperVerse in the US. Sam Lee was also charged in 2 separate indictments. One was filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the other was filed by the Department of Justice. So the indictments against Lee variously allege that firstly, Hyperfund was a Ponzi scheme, that the returns from Hyperfund were not coming from crypto mining operations, they were coming from the recruit of new members. The indictments say that Lee either knew that or was reckless in not knowing that in his presentations made to potential investors. The indictment also says that Lee was central to Hyperfund's operation throughout its life cycle and that he has unjustly enriched himself as a result. Lee has always denied that he was centrally involved. He's called the Department of Justice's indictment against him an embarrassment, but he's yet to face court. He's been challenged directly on whether HyperVerse was a scam. When things went wrong and people couldn't get out their money when he was fronting up to these meetings, he's asked, is this a scam? And he tells people point blank, no, it's not a scam, that something's gone wrong. He's trying to find a solution. It is worth noting that Ryan Zhu is yet to rate a mention in any of the lawsuits so far filed. So we have contacted Sam Lee. When we first approached him, he declined to answer our questions. After we published the first article about HyperVerse, he said that it included misstatements. We asked him to outline what those misstatements were for us to consider, but he declined to do so. He has consistently denied he was involved in the establishment of HyperVerse. We offered him the opportunity for a sit-down interview for this documentary, but he declined unless we removed all references to his involvement in the establishment of HyperVerse, which was something we weren't prepared to do. I have attempted to contact Ryan Zhu, but all I have is a Hong Kong registered phone number, which has led us nowhere. I guess it remains to be seen whether there'll be further charges laid or any arrests in relation to HyperVerse. I know that it is still the subject of investigation in some jurisdictions.
I haven't really thought of going to go to the police because it's my own fault, you know. $5,000 is not much for other people, but it's a lot for me. And I feel like that I've been really taken advantage of my trustworthiness between me and my friend. And thank God that I didn't get my family to go and put money into it as well.
It's an opportunity lost. But apart from the actual physical money, so much more emotionally, mentally, I can't put into words. Yeah, I know I couldn't put a value on it, but needless to say, it's a lot more than $100,000.
I guess one of the problems with these types of schemes is that they're operating in an industry that is entirely unregulated, and the legal and regulatory framework that we do have is not designed for the modern era. We're dealing with laws that are 30 plus years old, and so they're sort of unstoppable. There's very little that the regulators can do, even if they are aware of these schemes. And I think that's very frustrating for people who've been caught up in it and who want to see some justice and accountability, but also they want to see the system change so that this can't happen again. I mean, HyperVerse was one of the biggest scams of its type. I think in 1 year alone, the estimates that Chainalysis have are that it was $1.3 billion in 2022, and that is by far the biggest scheme that people lost money to in that year. So I think there's a hope that there can be something done to stop another HyperVerse happening, but I don't think there's a lot of confidence that that's the case. I guess one of the other big question marks for me is if Sam Lee and Ryan Zhu don't have the money, who does? If this was a multi-billion-dollar scheme, where has that money ended up? Maybe we don't ever get an answer to that.